I saw this story in Blacklock's, which is one of the few non-government funded news sources left in Canada. Here's what it looked like. Their headline was, "Say Canada's Unsafe" for CBC. Let me read a little bit from their story. "Canada is unsafe for Canadian Broadcasting Corporation reporters," says CEO Catherine Tait. The network chief, in a report to Parliament, claims CBC employees, quote, "face rising threats to their safety both online and in the field." The public broadcaster's role as a source of trusted news and supporter of original Canadian stories has never been more important than in today's increasingly polarized society, Tait wrote in the latest annual report. "Our news teams are experiencing the impact of this polarization firsthand as they face rising threats to their safety both online and in the field." Did you know that the CBC was facing safety threats? I didn't, and I keep my eyes peeled for such things pretty carefully, but maybe I already detected just a little bit of baloney here. My BS detector starting to ping like a Geiger counter. Safety threats online. Hey, you guys aren't just talking about mean tweets again, are you? Is that what you mean by safety? Yeah, when they blame others for polarization, sure. Let me read a bit more. "We're defending media freedom so our journalists can stay on the stories that matter to you, as they have throughout the pandemic and war in Ukraine and during the 2021 federal election and the convoy protests," wrote Tait. "Your public broadcaster is committed to supporting accurate and credible journalism as a cornerstone of our democracy. We are committed to protecting the journalists, producers, cameramen, and all the teams that do the work each and every day." Is that right? The CBC is defending media freedom. That's what they said. I haven't heard that one before. How are they defending media freedom? Where? When? In some court case that I haven't heard about? They did mention the pandemic. Okay. How did the CBC defend press freedom then? They didn't say a word when our reporters were assaulted, either David Menzies or Alexa Lavoie, or even when the Montreal police tried to search our Airbnb houseboat without a warrant. So what do they mean? They're defending freedom in the press in Ukraine, they said? They said that. But they don't even have a reporter in Ukraine. They sent a reporter in for a few days last year, but unless I've missed it, they haven't had a reporter there for ages. Maybe they mean this woman, Briar Stewart, their Russia correspondent, who, as you can see here, is based in London, England. That's a neat trick. You know, we could actually use someone fighting for press freedom in Russia and in Ukraine too. I can understand why the CBC isn't actually doing that, even though they just said they are. I mean, it's too dangerous. Here's a story. I don't know if you saw this one. There is an American journalist who has been taken prisoner by Russia. That's no good, so I can understand why CBC has their Russian correspondent in London. And here's the New York Times itself with the headline, "Critics say a new media law signed by Zelensky could restrict press freedom in Ukraine. Lawmakers who passed the bill said it would help meet European Union conditions for membership, but journalists have denounced it as a move towards censorship." So yeah, I wish the CBC were telling the truth. I wish they were fighting for press freedom in Russia or Ukraine or both. Then again, I say I wish the CBC were telling the truth a lot. Those are words I say often, don't I? So maybe the rest of the sentence was true? That they defend media freedom during the 2021 federal election and the convoy protest. But again, is that true? The only censorship I know of in the 2021 election was Rebel News being banned from attending the leaders' debate. We had to go to court in an emergency application to get an order letting us in. The CBC were nowhere to be found. And the trucker convoy, only in their own fevered minds were the CBC at risk. Not a single convoy protester was ever arrested or charged with violence or threats of violence in Ottawa. Like I say, the only violence in that entire city in that entire time was against Alexa Lavoie by Trudeau's Mounties. So what are they banging on about fighting for freedom? Well, you have to understand, in 2023, to the woke left like CBC, words are violence. So when they talk about safety, they mean safety from microaggressions, from mean tweets. My favorite part of this news story is the last paragraph. This is from Blacklocks again. The Canadian Association of Journalists in a January 28th, 2022 news release claimed its members suffered, quote, threats of violence and harassment from the Freedom Convoy. The association later acknowledged it learned of all incidents second or third hand and that they typically involved jibes on Twitter. They're liars. Sorry. I used to think about the Canadian Association of Journalists from time to time. I mean, I've been a journalist really on and off for 30 years. But the Canadian Association of Journalists are nothing but a lobby group to beg Trudeau for more money. And since they have to do that every year because Trudeau keeps them hungry, so they never stop begging, so they just are always trying to suck up to him. Here's a screenshot of the Canadian Association of Journalists website. I took this screenshot today. As you can see, it's almost completely focused not on journalism, but on begging for more subsidies. There is one story there, do you see him? Demanding that politicians don't get to decide who is or isn't a journalist. I sort of like that one. I can relate because Trudeau has banned us from so many things, from the Canadian Parliament itself and from attending UN events. But when I clicked on that link, it had nothing to say about any of that. It was a rant about the Conservative Party not wanting to let a left-wing journalist attend their private party function. Seriously, the Canadian Association of Journalists will demand that Conservatives let Liberals into their private functions, but has nothing to say about the Liberal government banning journalists from public functions. Like I say. Here's our friend Rupa Subramanian. She points out this whole annual report isn't just the CBC whining and playing the martyr again. It's about the CBC lobbying for Trudeau's next censorship law for him. It's called the Online Harms Act. It will criminalize hurt feelings and give the government the power to actually delete and block entire websites from the internet, North Korea style. Rupa's right. Well, all this made me want to read the CBC's annual report. I don't think I've ever said those words before, but yeah, I did want to read it. So I did. I found Catherine Tait's whiny letter, but while I was there, I thought I'd look at the real stats in the annual report, like how many people actually watch the CBC. Here's what they said. So the truth of what's true is surely worse than what they admit to. Here's what they admit to. You can see on their website, this is a chart of how the CBC and CBC News do with audiences in English Canada. Hey, no peeking. What market share do you think the CBC has on television during prime time? Remember, they have a huge brand name, the oldest TV station in Canada. They have $1.5 billion a year to pump them up. What do you think their market share is during prime time? Do you think it's 20%? Think it's maybe 10%? Actually, it's 5.8%. As you can see, they couldn't even meet their own target of 6.6%, but look at that. Their target for next year is even more laughable. 4.9% they expect, they aim, they're working hard to lose about 1/5 of their viewers in the next 12 months. That's their stretch goal. Remember, they failed to meet their goal this year, as you can see. So their goal is to lose viewers. It's probably going to be far worse. But how about news? And this gives me great hope. The CBC is full of government journalists pushing Trudeau's propaganda. So what percent of Canadians are watching CBC News? By the way, I should tell you, it is legally required by the CRTC regulator to have the CBC News on every cable package in the country. Did you know that? You legally cannot escape it. It is forced onto every basic cable package in Canada. So what percent of the audience do you think watches CBC News? Do you think it's 20%? Think it's 10%? Do you think it's 5.8%? Like the primetime shows? No, look at that. 2.1%. That is 1 out of 50 Canadians. If you walk down the street and go for a good long walk and you meet a person, let's say every minute, you wouldn't be walking for nearly an hour before you bumped into someone who watched CBC News last night. The first 49 out of 50 people you meet on the street, they wouldn't watch it, but I guess they'd still have to pay for it, right?